Hello everyone. Today, we'll examine NIO's stock performance, market dynamics, and upcoming events. NIO is stabilizing and aiming to fill a gap, influenced by factors like Apple's event. Despite recent challenges, NIO's long-term potential remains promising. What's going on with NIO stock? What's going on with the overall market? And let's talk about some very important levels to watch for. I'm also going to break down some very important things going on for this week and the next couple of trading days as we have Apple's big event and some big data dropping a little bit later. But before breaking things up all of this information, anyways, let's break down what's going on with NIO and all these different charts. So when it comes to NIO has been on this downtrend, right? Continuing to drop and drop. However, on the 4-hour mark, we're starting a bit slowly, and if you go and look, you can see that NIO is not crashing so hard. It's trying to pass around this area, and it's starting to form a slight divergence. So I'm really hoping that as long as there's no bad news, because if we get a bad piece of news, yes, NIO could start tanking and make its way back to 8.8. However, here's the thing, before that happens, if that is going to happen anyways, there's a good chance that it's going to try to fill this gap first. We have a gap that's unfilled around this 10.58 area. I think that there's a good chance that NIO is going to try to bounce and fill that gap before it ends up, dropping all the way down to lower levels. So I think this gap is going to get filled soon, and I'm hoping that we fill this gap around. It's actually very close to 10.6, very close to that area. Doesn't have to be exact, but wherever it goes with the doji forming on the daily charts. If you go and look at the chart, there are chances of seeing a bounce here just to fill this gap. And after that, it could continue lower because the daily trend is still more bearish. But the thing about NIO to remember is that, like I told you guys earlier, NIO tends to be very strong during the month of September for deliveries and also during November and December. We tend to be very strong. October tends to be a little bit weaker on the delivery side historically, but we have some strong months coming, and I do believe in NIO's future. Now when it comes to the overall news, I haven't seen too much news involving China, but NIO did nothing wrong. I want to make this clear. What did NIO do wrong to really cause it to tank like this? Yes, their earnings weren't the best, but that was a while back, and we actually saw NIO balance after its deliveries report NIO dropped for the last couple of days. Not because it's a bad company, but because all of the other Chinese tickers have been sinking amidst the bad Chinese economic data and some bad news involving China and other tensions. Okay, so it's not NIO's fault entirely. We should not just attack NIO. It's not their fault that they're getting stuck in these geopolitical issues, not to mention other macroeconomic factors. But anyways, wanted to talk about what's going on for the week. As a reminder, we have no significant data from Monday or Tuesday. Inflation expectations will be based on SURF expectations on Monday, and then nothing big after that, until we have the CPI coming out, which is due out on Wednesday. This is going to be huge. We are expecting an increase in CPI, so be prepared for that. And that's going to affect how the whole market moves. However, here's the thing about CPI and etc. when it comes to all of this data. CPI is going to be something coming out for the middle of the week. Before that, we have the Apple event on September 12th, and approaching this event, if you go and look, Apple might experience a little bump due to a pleasant, unfilled gap, and this could assist in a market bounce. NIO has been dropping on low volume. It's not crashing on high volume, it's a very low volume drop, which is a decent sign. And on top of that, if you look at the overall price versus its short volume, it's still not looking like that bad in my opinion. Now we're getting some buy ratings from like Deutsche Bank and etc. So that's a good piece of news that came out. The price-press ratio is relatively flat as NIO starting to flatten compared to the market. And Mondays tend to be green only about 49% of the time. So it's very much just a coin flip that doesn't really matter too much, but there's not a whole lot of shorting going on with NIO. We're not seeing an aggressive amount of shorts coming in, suppressing the company. It's very much just neutral. So what do I think is going to happen to the market? Well, here's the thing. I think Apple has a very, very nice looking structure. If you look at the daily charts, it's looking a little weak, but we have this unfilled gap, and if you see, Apple may try to fill that gap, then maybe before it goes down. But there's a good chance it's going to try to fill this gap all the way up into like the very low 180. And if that's the case, that could actually help the market bounce. Because here's the thing, when you zoom into the charts, we have an inverse head and shoulder structure on Apple. Apple has been showing some strength, making higher highs and higher lows for the past 2 days. And even though this thing continues to sink, we have the unfilled gaps above which I believe Apple's going to make an attempt to fill going into tomorrow. So I'm leaning more in that direction. So this thing may go to this imbalance around this 448 area for Nvidia. You know, it may help this thing bounce off the historical support around this 450 zone, so Nvidia could bounce to, and this can help the market, especially the Nasdaq. We have this unfilled gap at 470. So we're going to be watching this thing try to break for 65 to break to 470. And then finally for Tesla may make an attempt to bounce to trying to get back to this mid 250 area before rejecting and just trading sideways. I think there's a good chance it's going to do that. But Tesla's been very sideways for the last couple of trading days, not really doing anything that crazy. So with that said about Tesla and Apple, and all these tickers potentially bouncing, they may also get a bounce before I talk about NIO. The also has an inverse head and shoulder structure that has developed on it a nice accumulation, and if you look, this thing might be trying to push up towards this imbalance at 377. But we first have to break above 375. So it looks like we may get a pump approaching Apple's events. But don't forget, Apple has these big events all the time. Okay. By all the time, I mean like every few months. But you understand my point. When this happens historically, Apple tends to pump approaching the events. And after the events, if you look, you'll notice that Apple tends to sink down. Apple tends to drop after the big events. So with that said, there's a high probability Apple may pump approaching its event, try to fill its gaps around like the 180s, very, very low 180s, and then maybe dump after the event. If that's the case, it's going to have a big effect on the market. All right. So what does this all mean for NIO? What does Apple have to do with NIO? Well, the way that the market moves could affect NIO. We have a bullish divergence developing on the 30 minutes time frame. But here's the thing. Okay? These divergences and all these technicals, they do matter. They can be significant, but not always. If we get a really bad piece of news that could trump them. That's the only issue with NIO. We keep getting all this bad news involving China. That's why it started to sell off. It wasn't really NIO's fault. So as long as there's no bad news, if there's bad news that comes out tomorrow, again, as you guys will see, NIO will be pushed down to 9.49. However, here's the thing. I can predict the news, and I'm not leaning in the direction of that happening, as we dropped like almost 4 days in a row. So my gut tells me as long as there's no bad news, I think we're going to get a balance, and we're going to see NIO make an attempt to fill this gap around this 10.58 zone, very close to 10.6, and then we may reject off that and start to cool off a little bit. But I think there's going to be a balance coming to NIO. It's due for a bounce. It's been a very, very long time. So you'll go ahead and see it gap up and try to get to around 10.58 or so, then reject it and trade sideways. I think Apple has the power to grow the entire market and believe it can help NIO as well. But please remember, even if NIO is a little slow for the time being, we have a very bright future. The end of the year is going to be strong for the markets and also for NIO, in my opinion. I think as long as there's not way too much bad news from a macroeconomic standpoint on a daily basis, I think there's a lot of potential in this stock and think the long term is still very, very bright despite these short-term fluctuations. So hopefully this video is helpful. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stock predictions and market insights. Remember to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Happy investing, and see you in the next video.